On behalf of the Montana State University Honors College Honors Presents team, we thank you for watching Student Presents, an opportunity for students to share their interdisciplinary passions with others. Stay tuned for our next speaker, and if you are a Montana State University Honors student and are interested in giving a talk like this, please consult the description below. Enjoy!
Hi there, my name is Joshua, and I'm going to be talking to you guys today about rafting, how to weather the transitions of life. A little about myself. My name's Joshua Bartkoske. I'm a third culture kid, which means that I grew up overseas in between cultures. So I grew up in the country of Kazakhstan, but my parents are US citizens. So I never really developed a sense of belonging to any one of those cultures, but rather borrowed from each. And actually, the third culture that it talks about in that TCK is actually all of the different people that I relate to who have grown up in similar situations. Another important thing about me is I interned with an organization called MK to MK, and that's actually where this picture was taken on our summer project in South Africa. But it stands for Missionary Kid to Missionary Kid, and it's an organization that's all about helping younger TCKs and MKs learn how to deal with transition and all of the struggles that come with growing up overseas and then coming back to their homes. So I went through that as a high schooler, and then I got to intern with them in college and currently serve as a volunteer with them. Myself as well, I'm going to be graduating this May, undergoing my own season of transition and heading to the University of Utah to start a PhD program in physics. So what are we talking about here today? We're going to be talking about transition and how to go through transitions well. So to start out, what are transitions and what do they look like? Most transitions look like this: a simple curve of going through 4 different basic stages where you have your leaving, where you experience a lot of denial, you're ending things and things aren't necessarily very exciting. And so that leads to your second stage of resistance and often chaos, in this zone of finding yourself in an unknown place where you're not quite where you're going to be, but you've really left behind where you were. And once you start arriving, you start to undergo this time of exploration, looking at new things that eventually leads you to find a place where you have new beginnings and a sense of belonging and commitment. And that leads then back into a new season of transition as you end that new beginning and go through it again. There's a book out there called Third Culture Kids Growing Up Among Worlds, written by David Pollock and Ruth Van Recken, that actually goes through this transition model in a lot more detail. And I'm not going to go through that detail here. I really just want to talk about one action step that we can take to help deal with the process of leaving. Because leaving well truly is the first step in entering well. And as you look at this graph, and if you want the notes, I can send them to you later, but you can see that there's a lot of different emotions and psychological experiences that people have in transition. And honestly, all of that is very normal. So if you're undergoing transition right now, or you will be, and you feel rejection, resentment, or sadness, or you tend to have some emotional instability as you're going through a time of chaos, or you start to go through times of loss of identity or loss of self-esteem, those are completely normal in that process of leaving, transition, and entering. And that is something I want to affirm. Now, model, what is rafting, and why is rafting an important piece of saying goodbye well? Rafting itself is actually an acronym. It stands for reconciliation, affirmation, farewell, and think destination. And personally, I like to add the ing at the end because it indicates a process. And this isn't whitewater rafting. If some of you are expecting that, I'm sorry. But it's just a way that we can take steps to be able to think through the things that oftentimes are common sense in saying goodbye well and having a healthy closure to the relationships. Start going through this. First off is reconciliation. Now, reconciliation is just a situation in which two people or groups of people become friendly again after they have argued. It's just bringing people together who once had a disagreement. Now, the reason why this is important in saying goodbye and why it's the first step in building a raft to go through all these seasons of transition is that everyone carries emotional baggage. We all have things that are underneath the surface that actually reveal what our attitude is towards certain situations, which then influences our atmosphere and our environment that we live in. A story that my dad liked to share that relates to this is about a farmer who's working in his field, and there's some people who are coming up to him, and they're in their wagon, and it looks like they've got all their stuff packed. And they come up and they say, "Hey, we're new here. We're thinking of moving in. What are the people like here?" And the farmer just kind of goes, "Oh, you know, people are people." He's like, "What were they like where you were from?" And the people go, "Oh, we just couldn't stand them. We had so much gossiping going on behind our backs. There were so many people who just hated us, and we could never get along with our neighbors. We would always argue with them. Just felt like it was the worst place in the world, so we had to get out of there." And the farmer standing there goes, "Well, you know, the people here are pretty much the same." And so the family just keeps moving on. And as the farmer continues to work, another family comes up, and sort of the same thing happens. They ask the farmer, "Hey, what are the people like here?" And he says, "People are people. What were they like where you were from?" And the family says, "Oh, you know, they were actually really, really lovely. We hated to say goodbye to them. It was so hard. We loved getting to talk and raise our children together and interact and just always ask questions and be in each other's lives, and we were really sad to say goodbye." And the farmer responds to them and says, "Well, you know, the people here are pretty much the same." And although it's not always the case, sometimes there are people who are just have their own sense of attitude, but in general, wherever you end up going, the people that you find will be influenced by what your attitude is in approaching them. And that attitude is influenced by our emotional baggage. Now, in saying goodbye, well, we want to have reconciliation so that when we leave, we don't carry that emotional baggage with us. Part of that, and one of the first practical steps, is to forgive others and then to be forgiven by others. And this is a really important thing. Personally, in my own life, there were classmates of mine who left in the middle of high school and had a very strong conflict that didn't get resolved with another member in our class. And actually what ended up happening was it led to our class not being able to go on a senior trip altogether. It ended up leading to a very, very deep rift between people in our class. And it was all simply because people had this conflict and they weren't able to resolve it. Thankfully, at the end of my senior year, when everybody came back together for graduation from around the world, those two people actually ended up finding forgiveness and reconciliation. And it was an amazing thing because now actually, hopefully we'll have a class reunion this upcoming year and they both will be there. One of the most important pieces in reconciliation is to just tell people I'm sorry, or to tell someone that I've been hurt. That's the first step, and it's actually probably the hardest step because it's you being vulnerable with someone else. And it's a risk. It really is. But it's so worth it in the end. And sometimes reconciliation isn't possible, or it doesn't look the same way that you thought. And sometimes it can be hard. In my own journey, when I was in 6th and 7th grade, there was a conflict. It was really just a middle school drama thing with a girl who ended up not talking to me, but it really hurt. And it is actually something that I held on to for a number of years, and it wasn't healthy, and it affected my attitude towards relationships with girls and how to maybe start a relationship. And so that actually never got reconciled until the summer after my senior year, when I reached out to her again and just asked for forgiveness for the ways that I had hurt her way back in middle school, and letting her know that I had been hurt as well. And now that relationship is actually fine. And that's just one example, but I hope that you guys can take hope in knowing that reconciliation sometimes can take years. And even if you have felt like you're unreconciled with someone, you can still take steps to hopefully reconcile. The second step in building your raft is affirmation. An affirmation is a statement or sign that something is true, support or approval. And what this looks like in a broad sense is living without regrets. And it's true not just in transition, but all the time. To affirm people, to let them know that they matter to you. And that means taking risks. And reconciliation is one risk that we take in helping ourselves grow in our relationships, but affirmation can also be a risk. It's scary to sometimes think of telling someone what they really mean to you. But I can tell you that it's one of those things that I've never regretted and that has always meant the most to me in this stage of saying goodbye well. We all long to have affirmation and be acknowledged by people for the things that are true about us. And so the people in your life who you may wonder whether or not they know how much they mean to you, probably don't, but they would love to hear it. So as you're going, just a couple of things that you can do practically to get ready for that period of transition after you've reconciled with people. That's the first step you want to take. Don't leave that till the end. Do that first. It's the hardest step, but it's so much better to do that first than other times. The next thing is an affirmation. Think of people who matter to you. Could be a professor who taught you 3 courses and really influenced the way that you look at the world and your career decisions. Maybe it's a friend who just means a lot to you and you guys just need to get some time with each other to talk about these things and saying goodbye and really go over a lot of the things that matter to you about them. And in this, be specific. Don't just be general and be like, oh, you're a great friend. I love hanging out with you. Like, talk about those memories that mean a lot. Maybe it's with someone at the cashier at a grocery store that you go to. And just let them know that I love seeing your smile here every day that I come in. And it means so much to me every time I get to be here because I feel like I'm known. Now, the hard part about this, and the reason why it's a good part of saying goodbye, is that it's not just rejoicing over the blessings in our lives, but it's also mourning them. It's recognizing that we've had really good things in our life in this season, and now they're going to not be there. And we need to mourn those things. And if we don't, in the same way as not reconciling with people, it can lead to issues down the line where we have emotional baggage or unresolved grief. The next step in the process of building your raft is farewell. A farewell is just an occasion when someone says goodbye. And farewells have always been important in culture. But I feel like, especially in my generation or in people who say goodbye, so many people just want to withdraw or they want to ignore it. They just keep going as if life is normal. They never say anything and then they just leave without saying goodbye because they feel like that will be so much easier. But truly, a definite conclusion is best. For some of you, maybe in this time, like myself, that we're graduating, it's really this awkward season because it feels like this isn't a conclusion. It just feels like there's this long drawn out thing. And that's part of the reason why we have graduation ceremonies, is because it gives us an opportunity to have a definite statement that, oh, this is at the end, and now I'm going to go and do something new. Leaving without the farewell is honestly like a meal with no dishes. This isn't the best metaphor, but I was just trying to think of something where that doesn't make sense, that just leaves something unfinished that feels like it's incomplete. I mean, it's kind of like you're just going through and you're gonna eat this meal and then you forget the dishes. It's like it's messy, it's not fun, it really doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. And so when you think about saying farewell, you need to have definite moments with people that you say goodbye, that you actually physically say goodbye. And it's not just people. There's places, pets, and possessions that you also need to say farewell to. So think about those things as you get ready to go. And remember, this is the next step. So make sure you've taken time to affirm people well and have some last memories with them that are good. But then as you do that, think about the times when you can set aside the time to actually say goodbye. Now, some of the things to think about practically when you're thinking through this is to think about the people in your life that you need to say goodbye to. Think about friends who mean a lot to you, and make sure that you get like a goodbye party, a farewell celebration, that you can actually sit down and just say goodbye to people. And maybe you're going to see them again, and that's okay. But make sure you just have a moment, a time when people know they can say goodbye to you, because you never know if you're going to get that final moment with someone unless you plan it. Also with family, make sure you get time with family. One of the things that was really hard for me, and was one of those things that was still is unresolved a little bit, is when I studied abroad in China for a year, and I got to see my grandma before I left, but she actually passed away while I was in China. And one of the things that I did get to do that was actually really good was I got to call her about 12 hours before she passed away and give my final regards, just tell her I loved her and pray with her. And that is something that's so important, because when we don't get those moments, even if we think we're okay, it really does hang on us. And so those are important things that we have in our life. Or think about professors that mean a lot to you and say goodbye. Another thing is places. Think about places. We don't often maybe consider that we need to say goodbye to our places that we love, because people are the most important, but places also mean so much to us. I mean, think about right now, maybe a restaurant in Bozeman that you love. And if you're thinking of saying goodbye to Bozeman, you need to go and visit that restaurant and eat there one last time. You don't know if you come back that it will still be there. I thought Sola Cafe was going to be here for years, and it's gone. Just things like that happen. When I was in Kazakhstan, there was a place called the American Bar and Grill, and I loved it, but it got replaced by McDonald's, and I hadn't visited there for 3+ years before I left, and I didn't get to go back. And that was a sad thing. It was a loss that I had to name. So think about those things. Maybe there's a classroom or a walk or a mountain. For me, the M hike is one of those things. Also think about events even. If you're one of those people who loves Catapalooza and you're going to be a senior next year, take the time to really enjoy it. That's going to be your last time to really enjoy it, and take that time to recognize it's a last. Another thing you have to consider is pets and possessions. Sometimes you just can't bring them with you. So take that time to say goodbye to your pet. Sit down with them, go for a walk, be lazy for a day with them. And if you have items, think about those items and think about how you can say goodbye to them. Maybe start a collection of sacred objects that you are going to take with you wherever you go. For me, I have things like I have an essay from when I was in middle school that really set up my whole career for wanting to go into physics. And I've saved that. I haven't saved hardly anything else from middle school, but I've saved that because it's something that's sacred, that means a lot to me, and is representative of those years in middle school and how formative they were for me. Think through something like that, or maybe you find a rock on a hike and it's a really special rock, and imbue that rock with the meaning of the time that you've spent here. Really think destination. Now, thinking about your destination is such an important thing, because we need to know where we're going. And now there's not a definition for this exactly, but what I like to say about thinking destination is that you're researching the places you will be heading so that when you arrive, you'll have a foundation to stand on while experiencing the chaos of transition. When you're going through that season of transition, knowing something about your destination makes the journey so much easier. When I was getting ready to come to Bozeman, I had a senior project where we had to research where we were going. And when I researched Bozeman, I looked up things that seemed so insignificant, but I looked up clubs. I found out that there was soccer on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And even though I didn't go to that because I started doing other things, it was helpful to know about that. I also looked up radio stations so that I knew what I could listen to while I was there. I also looked up some of the history so I didn't feel like I was clueless walking in. And I looked up some of the best hiking trails and restaurants that I wanted to enjoy. Look at those things, because then when you show up at your new place, you'll feel, honestly, you're always going to feel like you're out of place and you don't know what's going on. But when you have something that you can turn to, some research you've done, to be reminded of something that you have in this location that you might want to enjoy, it's such a relief. Also, one of the good things to know is that we need is that we need to know where we're headed when we want to make it safely. If we don't know the things that are going to be there, if we don't know necessarily like maybe where the grocery store is, if we don't know exactly where we're going to get food or what the living situation is like, it's going to be difficult to transition there, and we're just going to get hurt in the process, or it's going to feel scary. So preparing well is such an important part of leaving well. And again, like I mentioned at the beginning, leaving well is the first step to entering well. And I want to talk a little bit though, because this is all about building your raft and leaving well. But there's times when we don't leave well. And there's maybe times that you haven't left well. And even in leaving well, there can still be things that we forget about or things that we miss out on. And so what do we do with those sorts of things in our lives? That's called unresolved grief. And I want to read a poem to you that talks about this. It's called The Mock Funeral. There was no funeral, no flowers, no ceremony. No one had died, no weeping or wailing, just in my heart. I can't, but I did anyway, and nobody knew I couldn't. I don't want to, but nobody said they didn't. So I put down my panic and picked up my luggage and got on the plane. There was no funeral. This poem is representative of the experiences of a lot of TCKs. And it's just a reminder of the hardships that come with leaving, and that sometimes we leave and there's nothing that we can do that seems to help. I experienced this in my own life. And one of the most helpful things I've found in dealing with unresolved grief is to first name losses. It's one of the biggest things I think we can do. And even in this time when life is so crazy and the transition is so much an unknown, naming losses can be really helpful. For me, that's meant looking at what I would have been doing during this last month of school and naming the losses that I have. The loss of not getting to meet up with my professors. The loss of not having in-person lab. The loss of not having a graduation ceremony right now in May when my whole family was going to be coming. The loss of not getting to go and see my brother's graduation. These are things that are helpful to name because they allow us to grieve and they allow us to see the things that we've lost. Another thing is that grief that's unresolved often gets expressed in ways that we don't notice, and it's helpful to know about those things. So these are the expressions of unresolved grief. Now, as you look at that list, there might be some of them that you relate to, some of them you don't. But one of the things I want you to know is that any of them is okay, any of them are fine, but you don't want to remain in any one of them for too long. If you're in anger and you experience that because of this unresolved grief, don't allow that anger to consume you. Allow it to be there and recognize that it's coming from something deeper, and then move into another one of these expressions of grief. For me personally, I've expressed grief a lot of the time through vicarious and delayed grief. When I left high school, I didn't actually grieve at my graduation, but within about a week, almost nobody from my graduating class was left in the same country as me. And that was a really hard thing, but I didn't notice it at the time that was something that I hadn't grieved over, that I didn't get to see my friends more over the summer. It wasn't until my spring semester freshman year when one day I woke up and I started to sob. I just woke up, and as I was sitting there, I felt tears welling up inside of me, and I started to cry, and I called my mom because I didn't know what was going on. And I was crying and crying and crying, and eventually I had to go to class, so I wiped my tears, went and sat into my lecture for Calc 2, and just didn't want to be there, didn't know what was happening. As soon as I left, I started sobbing again and called my mom and just had no idea where this grief was coming from. And as I processed that with my mom, I ended up realizing that I was grieving the loss of my classmates, that I knew my classmates were all in different places, and very likely I wouldn't be able to see most of them ever again. And that was a really hard thing for me to grieve and to deal with, but when I recognized where those tears were coming from, it helped me resolve that grief inside. And I didn't stay in that delayed grief either. I did have some sadness and anger as well, but eventually I did come out of that into a healthy spot where I'd grieved that loss of my friends, and I was in a better spot where I could engage well. Now, to bring it all back together, rafting, reconciliation, affirmation, farewell, think destination. It's a continuous cycle. It's something that we could do pretty much all the time if we chose to. But I don't think that's a healthy thing either. I want to share this with you because I think this is a tool that will allow us as people to be able to transition well and to be able to invite others to learn how to say goodbye. But if you feel like you're being thrown about in the chaos of transition and you felt like you did a good job of saying goodbye, that's not meaning that you're failing at this or that this isn't working. It just means that goodbyes are hard and they don't get any easier. And what I want you to know is that in this process of rafting, use as much of it as you need, and know that as you use it, it will be hard, there will be pain and sorrow, but when you come out of it and you enter into a new stage, you will feel so much more free and alive and able to give again to a new community and to find yourself loving people at a much deeper level. So wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, I just hope and pray that you can take something from this and that you can learn how to grow in your relationships with others and how to transition and weather the storms of life. Thank you so much.